call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 108 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. This is for the benefit of the witness. We are starting an hour delayed today. That was due to the statements in the House regarding the situation in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 108(2) and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 21st, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on policy decisions and market forces that have led to increases in the costs of buying or renting a home in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged into, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I'm informed by the committee clerk that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting, and everything is working fine. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses. So with us today, we have 6 different witnesses groups, and we're starting with the Canadian Home Builders Association. We have the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Kevin Lee, is joining us. From the City of London, Mayor Josh Morgan, welcome, Your Worship. From the Federation of Québécois de Municipalités, we have Claire Bolduc, who's the Rive Regional County Municipality of Témiscamingue, and the political advisor for the Fédération Québécoise des Municipalités, Maryse Drolet. From the Housing Now TO, I believe it is, we have technical lead Mark Richardson. From the Ontario Home Builders Association, Sue Wastel, who's the builder and developer there, is joining us by video conference. And from the University of Winnipeg, Dr. Shauna McKinnon, who's a professor and department chair, Urban and Inner City Studies, Manitoba Right to Housing Coalition, also by video conference. So on that, witnesses, you'll have up to 5 minutes to make an opening statement before we get to members' question time. So we'll start with the Canadian Home Builders Association. Mr. Kevin Lee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee, for having me here today to support your study. It's critical to understand well the real issues eroding affordability and preventing supply. And from the motion that led to this study, I can see there are some potential misunderstandings of the situation that I would like to address head-on. As for the CHBA, let me be clear that our members build all forms of housing, from single detached homes, which are fewer and further between these days, to low-rise multi-unit houses, townhomes, stacked townhomes, to mid-rise buildings, to high-rise apartment complexes. And while I'm listing what we build, let me emphasize that we need to build all of these forms of housing. We need to build smarter upwards, inwards, and outwards to build 5.8 million homes this decade to achieve the affordability and choice that Canadians want and need. And our members build housing units for private home ownership, for rental, and for affordable housing owned by not-for-profits and governments. And again, we need more of all of these. But we must recognize that it has taken decades of government policies restricting building and driving up house prices to get to this point. And to get out of this crisis, there is no silver bullet. It will take comprehensive approaches by all levels of government, focus on the right outcomes, and it will take years to turn this completely around. But the time to take action, and fortunately some has already begun, is now. Right now, high interest rates and inflation are indeed an issue with housing affordability, and we do need those to come down as soon as possible. But let's be clear. While the study by the committee motion states that 40% of mortgage holders are having trouble paying for their expenses, 47% of renters are having the same issue. And 23% of homeowners without a mortgage are also having the same challenge. So this isn't about owning versus renting, though homeowners clearly have a better financial situation, showing again why home ownership should continue to be encouraged for Canadians. But this is about inflation and cost of living, an issue for all Canadians, and about essentially all of their necessities. So while we need to address inflation overall, and higher interest rates do need to come down to make housing more affordable, as well as to support more construction and supply, the root causes of home price escalation are not about today's inflation. They are about other policy issues that preceded the inflation situation and will persist afterwards and desperately need policy change. These policy changes can help us in the current high interest rate environment, but will also be needed as rates come down because we need to dramatically increase our housing supply. And the drivers of price escalation and deteriorating affordability have been and continue to be a lack of housing supply, high taxes at all levels of government, but especially at the municipal level, mortgage rules that have locked out first-time buyers and limited construction, red tape, delays, and NIMBYism, labor shortages and increasing labor costs, and expensive changes to codes and standards that are slated to get worse in the years ahead. All of these have been created by government policy, and all can be addressed by policy change. But let me address the financial issues, or financialization, if you will, head on. Without the ability of Canadian individuals and organizations to finance the construction of more housing, we simply will not be able to double housing starts to address the housing gap. Building 3.5 million additional homes this decade will take an investment of over $1 trillion, the lion's share of which must come from private capital. For first-time buyers, the first financial policy piece is simple. Given the challenges with house prices, we need to increase the purchasing power of first-time buyers without driving up house prices. A return to 30-year amortization periods for insured mortgages, but only applied to new construction, can support more construction of entry-level homes that young families can afford without driving up prices and causing extreme demand in a supply-constrained market, because empirically this will be adding to new supply. It's also, by the way, a no-cost measure for the government to implement. With regard to private investors and rental units, we need to be clear. Investors are essential to create the rental supply we need in Canada. We need Canadians with the means to be able to purchase and finance rental units for long-term renters, which, by the way, includes laneway homes and other accessory dwelling units. We also need institutional investors to support purpose-built rental, or PBR as we call it. But again, let's be clear, there is limited profit in purpose-built rental, which is why institutional investors like pension funds for unions and insurance companies with patient capital and a long-term investment outlook are essential to support PBR development. The low margins, which thankfully will now be made a little bit better thanks to recent GST changes, are why most developers have built condos instead of PBR over the years, and we don't have enough PBR in Canada now. And right now, with interest rates high, making financial construction issues even more expensive, it's actually making it more sense for investors to invest in GICs at a 5% return rather than apartment development. Investment in PBR is not a get-rich-and-get-out investment. It's a long-term investment, and we need private patient capital to make that happen. I'd be happy to speak to the many other barriers beyond these that I've just mentioned, and other drivers increasing house prices, which many of you have heard from me before, but I'm out of time, so I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lee, and there will be a lot of time for questions. Now we're going to the City of London, and Mayor Morgan, please.
Sure. Thank you to members of the Standing Committee on Finance for inviting me to be here today as a witness and provide insights on this critical issue as my perspective as Mayor of the City of London. Let me first recognize members of Parliament from London, Peter Fragiskatos, Ariel Kayabaga, Lindsay Matheson, and Karen Vecchio. I want to say I value my relationship with each of them and deeply appreciate their commitment to our community and their constituents and their desire to work collaboratively on tangible solutions. I also want to once again thank the federal government for choosing London as the first community in all of Canada to receive funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. $74 million announced last month will allow our city to facilitate the creation of an additional 2,187 new homes over the next 3 years. That's an increase of 23% more than we otherwise would have built. It will also provide opportunities to support our unprecedented health and homelessness system response while exploring a series of innovative housing solutions, including the conversion of vacant office space in the downtown into rental housing. I'm here today as the mayor of a city with a unique perspective on housing affordability. We are one of the fastest growing cities in all of Ontario and one of the most rapidly expanding population bases in all of Canada. We've enjoyed many benefits as a result, but London has also experienced a variety of challenges, affordability being chief among them. In the face of soaring rental rates and housing prices, our council has committed to permitting the construction of 47,000 new homes over the next 10 years. Across Ontario, it's estimated that we need at least 1.5 million new homes and over the next 10 years to adequately house the population. Meanwhile, there's never been a period where more than 850,000 homes have been built in any decade, so it's clear that we have an unprecedented challenge before us. All levels of government must commit to prioritizing the development of housing within existing urban and suburban areas in order to expedite housing development that is cost-effective and delivered in the most timely way. Maximizing the use of existing and easily expandable physical infrastructure, including pipes, roads, and transit, is the fastest and most effective use of resources to provide new housing through intensification, infill, and logical extensions of existing development. The cost of available land is also a critical element in establishing the feasibility of all housing developments. Given the extent of land owned by the Canadian government, a real difference could be made if the not-for-profit housing sector could gain preferential access to some of these lands. Long-term, no-cost or low-cost land leases for not-for-profit housing corporations for the purpose of building affordable housing would render many new multi-residential developments projects feasible, while the government retains the land assets in perpetuity. Any and all economic stimuli directed towards development of purpose-built rental accommodations will help in getting the most necessary forms of housing built. The recent decision to eliminate the GST on purpose-built rental construction through a rebate program is a valuable first step in creating a climate conducive to the development of affordable housing. Retroactively adjusting the start date for this program from mid-September to the beginning of the federal fiscal year would have an even greater measurable effect on the development of affordable housing by making eligible hundreds, if not thousands, of projects that have already substantially cleared local planning hurdles. Offering discounts and interest rates on affordable and supportive housing projects through the Canada Infrastructure Bank would immediately result in the development of proposals for the most needed forms of housing, which is instrumental in addressing our most vulnerable population's housing needs. Reestablishing a newly focused multi-unit residential benefit, a de facto tax deduction for investors in carefully selected, purpose-built, and affordable residential development projects could contribute to numerous new housing projects for the most underserved niche in the housing supply in many cities. The federal government should revisit the HST rebate thresholds established in 1991. Given the cost of housing has at least doubled since that time, a commensurate doubling of the $350,000 to $450,000 HST rebate would have enormous affordability benefits for first-time home buyers who may vacate existing rental properties to buy a new home. Finally, I'd be remiss if I did not make reference to the most valuable element in the housing continuum, and that is the human element responsible for building homes. Federal programs which contribute to an increase in the pool of skilled labor that builds homes are enormously valuable. Whether through targeted immigration or the implementation of a complementary skills development programs with the provinces, the expansion of Canada's skilled labor pool is essential for the expansion of our home building capacities. I want to thank you for this opportunity to present some of these ideas today. I believe the issue of housing is a shared responsibility, and being able to work in partnership across all levels of government and industry partners is critical to us tackling the housing affordability challenges in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Morgan. Now we'll hear from the Fédération Québécoise des Municipalités, and via video conference we have Claire Bolduc and Maurice Droulet, and they will be sharing their time, I understand.
We don't. I'm going to talk for the two of us. Monsieur le Président, membres du comité, merci beaucoup.
Chair and committee members, thank you for giving us an opportunity to share the FQM's vision in terms of housing, and we hope to be able to help resolve the housing crisis that is affecting all areas in Quebec and other regions in Canada. Our FQM is a dynamic organization that speaks on behalf of more than 1,040 local municipalities and regional members. We are the spokesperson for the regions in Quebec. The housing shortage is a subject of great concern for the FQM. Over the past 2 years, we have acted at all levels and within standing committees in order to reflect on these issues and especially to identify potential solutions. We provided the outcome of these reflections in a paper, in a position paper that we have given to your clerk. We feel that the housing crisis is an event right now that affects all regions and that has been made worse by the pandemic. This crisis has had a direct impact on the local and regional economies, on the vitality of the communities, as well as the life of these communities. The housing strategy has affected our activities at all levels and has even affected how we are able to attract labor into our areas. The municipalities are also affected and are now in action mode in order to respond to the needs in terms of rental housing. For example, many municipalities have adopted housing policies. They have also crafted guides for developers, and they have also crafted guides for co-ops so that their units can also be better managed. There have also been the hiring of project managers to help decision making. We're working on setting up funding programs as well, because we're talking about 860,000 new housing units by 2030, and they have to be affordable. The current context is making us actually review all our ways of interfering in these areas. We have to be bold, and we have to adapt the way we work in order to find real solutions to the needs that have been identified. Let's take Abitibi-Témiscamingue, for example, where for 20 years now, the population has been rather stable, about 150,000 individuals. But we have a shortage of 6,000 housing units. And in the past, we were able to meet housing needs. But lifestyles have changed, and our ways of using this housing has changed. For example, there is short-term rental now. And there is also fly-in and fly-out labor now, labor that moves but doesn't necessarily live in our areas. There's also tourism in our area, and that also affects housing. So I'm not talking about urban sprawl. I'm talking about how we can live in these areas. Concretely speaking, we feel that housing is an intrinsic part of land development and any strategic planning that affects the development and the use of these lands. In order to face the current crisis, we would like to have the ability to be more flexible and agile in these regions in order to be able to adapt and meet the challenge of rapidly increasing the need for housing and housing supply to meet that demand. In other words, the various government levels have to agree and work together. They have to be able to agree on financial assistance. And, for example, we were very pleased to see the agreement between the federal government and Quebec on the $900 million that will be provided. To be continued. We also want to see authority and power decentralized when it comes to housing, to have management at a human level. We feel that RCMs in Quebec are the most appropriate level of management in order to be able to face this challenge. We need to decentralize any support programs for housing, and this has to be accompanied by the necessary financial resources. The disbursement of those financial resources has to be fair so that it takes into account the diversity and reality of the various regions. In some areas, we may be talking about single-family units. In other areas, we may be talking about rental units. So this development, land development and use has to be adapted to the needs of the regions. The adaptation of land use has to be allowed in order to be able to better meet the needs of rural communities in terms of housing. Better adapting these resources will allow us to meet the needs of all clients, whether it be single people, whether it be families. Thank you very much, Ms. Bolduc.
During questions to be able to expand.
I have to leave at 5:30. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks for letting all the members know. So 5:30 from Madame Bolduc. So if you have questions for her, please get them out early. Now we're going to the Housing Now TO and Mr. Richardson, please.
Thank you for inviting me to appear before you for the very first time at your committee today. My name is Mark Richardson, and I am the technical lead volunteer at Housing Now TO. Created in 2018, we are a pro bono professional services collective who leverage our members' open data, civic tech, urban development, and financial analysis skills to help the City of Toronto to successfully achieve its targets for new build affordable rental apartment developments by 2030. We need our federal parliamentary leadership to focus on delivering surplus lands, approvals, funding, speed, and certainty to not-for-profits and their pension fund and private sector development partners. To be 100% clear, we do not represent the City of Toronto, Create TO, Toronto Community Housing here today. Our Housing Now TO volunteers come from varied planning, architecture, technology, construction, educational and institutional backgrounds. We work to ensure that all new build affordable rental apartments in Toronto are viable, fundable, buildable, and sustainable over a full 99-year period of affordability. We are an unpaid advocacy group. We're a think tank that focuses our work on answering the three key questions that every new affordable housing rental development is in jeopardy in 2023. The questions are, does it pencil? Does this project make any financial sense, and who's going to carry the risk? Does it scale? Does this project, can it be expanded? Can it be repeated? How can we speed up the delivery? What are the delays, and how can they be removed? Since early 2019, the City of Toronto has formally dedicated 22 parcels of surplus city-owned land and layered on financial incentives with a combined value of over $1 billion into the Housing Now program. That surplus land has been proactively upzoned to create a more viable opportunity to develop approximately 17,000 new mixed-use, mixed-income apartments and condos in transit-accessible neighborhoods throughout the city. This is slowly being accomplished via City of Toronto partnerships with the private sector, Indigenous, co-op, and not-for-profit developers and operators. The first successful Housing Now site with 725 new rental apartments, including 218 new affordable rental units, finally broke ground 10 weeks ago near Etobicoke's Kipling subway and GO train stations. Every one of these Housing Now developments needs aggressive policy, processing, and financial support from our federal government. It is also a model that the federal government should consider for its own surplus lands that are located within the City of Toronto. The land is leased for 99 years. It is not sold. The land is aggressively upzoned for scale and viability before it goes into the leasing market. A minimum of 1/3 of the units or residential space are committed to affordable rentals for the full 99-year term of the land lease. Additional incentives, rebates, and tax waivers are applied to deepen the affordable rents on different segments of those apartments. And partnerships are enabled and supported between the private sector, Indigenous co-op, and not-for-profit partners on Housing Now sites. Through our volunteers' work with the University of British Columbia's Housing Assessment Resource Tool, or HART, we have identified that the City of Toronto alone has a deficit of over 210,000 apartments that we need that would rent below $1,700 a month, according to the 2021 census. And over 70% of full-time minimum wage households in Toronto could not find affordable rental housing in 2021. Those numbers are only worse today in 2023. All of our federal political parties agree we have a housing crisis. Canada's largest cities have a housing emergency, and it requires our federal government to have a wartime response to deliver net new supply at speed and at scale. Time is the enemy of new affordable rental apartment developments everywhere, but especially in Toronto. A standard of 600 square foot affordable rental apartment in 2010 would have cost about $210,000 to build. By 2017, that same apartment development the cost had risen to $276,000 per unit. And as I sit here today, the same apartment's costs now hover around $470,000 per unit. While we sit in this meeting, construction costs are increasing and they are continuing to rise. And affordable rental housing developers are all holding our breaths to see what the Bank of Canada's next interest rate announcement will be on October 25th. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Richardson. And now we'll hear from the Ontario Home Builders Association, Ms. Sue Wastel, please. And she's via video conference. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am very pleased to be here today to bring an Ontario perspective to the discussion, given our need to build over 1.5 million homes in Ontario by 2031 to address the housing shortage in this province. As co-president of Wastel Homes, a family-owned builder-developer in London, Ontario, I am a current board member of the London Home Builders Association, as well as its past president. I've been a board member of the Ontario Home Builders Association, and I am president of CHBA. On that note, I should mention that I am pleased to see our mayor, Josh Morgan, appearing today. In my roles with the association, I've always strived to develop workable policies to deal with housing affordability. This has always been a priority of all three levels of our association. And with my own children coming into adulthood, it's doubly important for me to ensure home ownership isn't out of reach for Canada's next generation. As Kevin mentioned in his remarks, the current housing crisis is rooted in many issues that must be addressed. And at the top of that list is insufficient housing supply. In order to tackle this and thereby help address housing affordability, the OHBA has developed 5 priority action areas for Ontario. And given that this is a Government of Canada committee, I can tell you from my work with CHBA that they apply almost everywhere across the country. The first priority area is to make homes more affordable by speeding up approval timelines and eliminating red tape. Most municipalities in Ontario experience delays in development approvals for building new homes long past reasonable regulated timeframes. These delays can last years and add significant cost to the price of a new home. Every year that a municipality delays an approval decision in Ontario, it costs home buyers an additional $36,000 for a typical low-rise home and an additional $26,000 for a high-rise apartment. More needs to be done to establish and enforce reasonable timeframes for new home construction approvals. To further address the issues of lengthy approval timelines that add to the cost of building housing, the OHBA is looking to the province to link municipal access to infrastructure funding to meet new housing start targets, just as we understand the federal government is looking to do. Municipal delays have forced many in the industry to appeal to the provincial agency that settles development disputes, the Ontario Land Tribunal. The magnitude of delays has created a substantial backlog, which is also adding time and costs to the building of new homes. The second priority area is to make new lands available to build housing. Housing supply and costs are dependent on land availability, and the supply of available lands designated for growth across municipalities is dwindling rapidly. Similarly, the addition of new housing within existing communities is severely restricted by municipal zoning and NIMBYism. This prevents the addition of supply and drives up costs. As a result, land values for service lots across the province have increased and in some cases have tripled or quadrupled, adding hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of a new home. The third area is development taxes. Development taxes are out of control and now make up a significant portion of the cost of a new home. Recent studies by the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis show government-imposed costs contribute to over 30% of the cost of a new home in Ontario. All of these fees are passed on to the home buyer. Through these fees and charges, municipalities have amassed large reported surpluses. For example, in the GTA alone, these surpluses are in excess of $5 billion. The fourth area pertains to the need to lay the groundwork for future growth. The supply of housing is highly dependent on critical services and transportation infrastructure. Prolonged delays of infrastructure projects delay and threaten the delivery of much needed housing. We need all levels of government to make funding and completing these projects a priority. The federal government is in an important position to ensure its funding investments go towards housing supportive infrastructure, for example, for public transit and wastewater. Building homes is the easy part, but if we cannot connect to municipal services, we cannot create our much needed housing supply. The fifth and final priority area for OHBA is to take the local politics out of planning. NIMBYism plays a huge role in slowing or stopping much needed housing supply, and there is strong pressure for individual municipal councillors to get behind community opposition to growth and development because they are elected by existing residents, not future ones. We need to change municipal processes through measures like as-of-right zoning to get the politics out of planning, and the federal government is in a position to support that message and also use its fiscal levers to enforce it. The housing file is deeply complex, and it will take prolonged and concentrated efforts by all levels of government to address the crisis that we face. Our industry is ready to play its part. I thank you for the opportunity to appear as a witness today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wastel. And now we're going from London, Ontario to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and we'll hear from Dr. Shauna McKinnon, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to participate today as your committee studies the important issue of housing affordability. My area of expertise pertains to the crisis related to rental housing for low-income households. I'm the principal investigator of 2 Social Sciences Humanities Research Council-funded projects focused on issues related to public policy to address poverty and inequality, and housing is a central focus of our work. In collaboration with university researchers and housing advocates from across the country, we're examining the crisis in low-rent housing and potential solutions. The housing crisis that we now face has been building for a very long time, and it won't be easily solved. The solution begins with a fundamental shift in thinking about housing as a societal foundation rather than a means to accumulate wealth. Housing is among the most basic of needs that, if not met, leads to a host of social and economic problems that affect us all. The challenges Canada faces regarding access to affordable housing are not unique. Many nations with similar levels of economic wealth are dealing with this issue. However, some nations are more successfully tackling it. These nations are recognizing that the decades-long experiment of trying to solve public problems such as housing for low-income households through profit-motivated means have failed. These countries are scaling up investment in social housing, having learned that the private market simply does not produce good quality housing affordable to the lowest income households. When examining rental market needs, it is important to note that housing demand is outpacing supply, but rental housing is being built. However, the rental housing that is most needed is not. CMHC reports that across Canada, rental affordability for the lowest 20% of income earners is especially challenging. Rental housing affordable for these households is virtually non-existent in urban centers. With a few exceptions, the rental market share affordable for low-income households is less than 5% in major centers. It's 1% in Vancouver and near non-existent in Ontario cities. Units that are available are typically bachelor or one bedrooms, and these are inappropriate for families. At the same time that almost nothing is being built for low-income renters, the supply of existing low-rent units continues to shrink, with the loss of more than 300,000 units between 2011 and 2016 alone. This trend is exacerbating the desperation of low-income renters and revealing a serious flaw in public policy that has been built on the notion that the private market will fix this problem, even though decades of evidence shows that it will not. Canada is lagging behind other OECD countries that have recognized the importance of social non-market housing as part of a broader housing strategy. Canada ranks 20th among OECD countries in terms of the percentage of social rental dwellings as a share of the total number of dwellings. The OECD average is almost twice as high as the rate in Canada. Clearly, we can do much better. Housing researchers look to the 1980s as a period of significant change in the beginning of the crisis we are now in. The federal government backed away from its commitment to social housing in the 1990s, and private developers moved away from purpose-built rentals. The current low rental supply has led to soaring rents, even in jurisdictions with rent controls, which have typically been seriously weakened. Special tax treatment for real estate investment trusts continues to fuel the financialization of housing, further entrenching a culture of housing for investment rather than home. In 2017, the Government of Canada implemented its national housing strategy with, I quote, the primary goal to make safe and affordable housing accessible for the most vulnerable Canadians and for those struggling to make ends meet, end quote. The strategy has failed to produce the housing needed for the most vulnerable renters, largely because it has focused almost solely on subsidizing the private market. It is notable that a mere 3% of units funded through the National Housing Strategy's largest program are affordable to low-income renters. The Rapid Housing Initiative, created during the pandemic, has been more successful, but it is far too small a program to have had an impact. It needs to be expanded. Through research and dialogue with colleagues, advocates, and precariously housed people from across the country, we have determined that essential to solving this problem for those who are most vulnerable is an immediate expansion of social housing. Our research consortium is calling on the Government of Canada to work in collaboration with other levels of government to invest in adding a minimum of 30,000 net new social housing units annually over 10 years, where rents are no more than 30% of household income in perpetuity, starting in budget 24-25, and invest in the acquisition, construction, operation, and maintenance of new and existing public, nonprofit, and cooperative-owned housing that meets the unique and varied requirements of people experiencing core housing need and homelessness. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. McKinnon. It's great to have so many expert witnesses with us today. You have your finger on the pulse with everything housing, and I know the members are eager to ask questions. We are going to get into it right now. In our first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask you questions, and we're going to start right away with MP Lawrence for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the guests and all the folks from London who have joined us today. So it's great to have you here. I'm going to focus my questions and comments with respect to the home builders. So Ms. Westall and Mr. Lee, and either one of you are welcome to jump in and to answer. So you've talked a little bit about the effect of interest rates, both in your submissions and in your testimony today. Now, I just want to be clear on one thing. It's not just the interest rates that affect the actual home buyer. It's actually the home builders as well, right? And so as interest rates continue to creep up, as former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley said, as this government continues to spend, the Governor of Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, is forced to hit harder and harder on the brake, which is the increasing in interest rates. Would you please comment on the effect I think it's rather obvious with respect to homeowners, but also on your members and their ability to make use of capital and to build homes if interest rates continue to creep up?
Start off and pass it on to Sue, but you're exactly right. Of course, with higher costs of borrowing money, becomes that much more difficult to finance construction. So that it results in increased costs, but also can result in less financing coming from financial institutions. Coupled with house prices that are slowing, you can be in mid-construction, and I bet Sue can speak to this about how your development can come into jeopardy simply because of the changing financial regime. Even though you still want to move forward, maybe your margins are going to be lower. The financial institutions won't proceed. So there's definitely a lot lot of knock-on effects of the higher interest rates, and the same goes through. We've heard talk about purpose-built rental. It gets harder and harder. On any construction project, you're trying to make sure, as the term was used by Mark, that it pencils out. With higher borrowing costs, a lot of projects stop to pencil out, and we've certainly seen across the board a lot of projects delayed, even for home ownerships, projects not going forward because they don't pencil out right now, and they know they won't be able to sell. Sue, did you want to add to that?
Sure, I would totally agree with Kevin. I think right now we have a very low surety of our customer. We're not certain that projects that we were going to move forward would actually sell in today's climate with the interest rates as they are, and who could qualify for them with the stress tests being so high. So that has certainly caused projects to go on hold, which is certainly not helping the overall demand that we know is out there. But we just are lacking the surety in what's going to be happening 6 months from now when those units would be able to be coming on the market. And so everyone is sort of holding tight a little bit in the moment.
Thank you very much for those answers. One of the comments that caught me here that I'll just comment on quickly is you said with GICs now approaching at a rate where it may be more profitable for some builders just to put the money into a GIC as opposed to actually building homes. We're seeing that on a larger scale, of course, with the bond market as well. And that's Canada. Canada has a productivity crisis, as I'm sure you're aware. It's affecting your industry. It's affecting all industries. And removing that capital is just going to make it more and more challenging. The numbers, Ms. Westall and Mr. Lee, are staggering, and I truly do wish you Godspeed because we're building at, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, you're the experts here, at 1970s levels. And we are about 3.5 million short by 2030 of the doors that we need. And so I believe that we need a full court press effort, and we need to enable you and encourage you to do everything you can and empower your members to do everything they can to build houses. My question, though, is this. A couple weeks ago, the CMHC was here, and I asked them point blank, is the current federal government's policy sufficient to bridge this gap? And they were actually quite clear and quite pointed when they said no. And so I'm going to ask you that same question. Are the current policies of this federal government sufficient to bridge the housing gap?
Every level of government needs to do a lot more. I think the term wartime effort has been used, and that's where we are. I think the current government has taken some steps in the right direction, and it's going to take a lot more to get from here to there, be it, Mr. Morgan was talking about the issue on GST on new homes. We do need to change the immigration system to get more labor. We do need to see the tying of infrastructure dollars and transit dollars to housing outcomes, which I think all levels of government are now getting on board to do. So that's good. So there's an awful lot that needs to be done to roll that out. And, to your comments about, GICs and the low rate of return, I think it's really important that we focus on, and it's not our developers necessarily investing those dollars. In many cases, as I said, those are investing institutions, pension funds, that kind of thing that can put their money anywhere. And for those who think that the market has failed for affordable housing, the market isn't supposed to deliver below market rate affordable housing by definition. So when you talk about the cost of construction going from $200,000 a unit to $400,000 a unit, there's a reason why the market isn't providing $180,000 a unit buildings, because it's not affordable. That is when governments need to step in. However, if we don't fix housing affordability in the market rate, we will never be able to build enough affordable housing. So I really think it's critical that while we focus on the importance of affordable housing and social housing, that everybody also focus on construction costs, immigration, everything in the market rate, because if people can't afford to buy and rent homes in the regular market, we'll never have enough social housing, affordable housing.
Thank you, MP Lawrence. And now over to MP Zerowitz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to thank all our speakers today for their excellent presentations. Mr. Lee, I think we're going to adopt you as part of our committee. You come all the time. It's always great to hear from you. I'm just going to start off where my colleagues start off, just on inflation, just because sometimes when you have an audience that listens, it makes it sound like we only have inflation in Canada. Would you agree that there's inflation around the world and there's these increasing costs that's causing housing prices and the cost of building new houses is an issue around the world?
100% it's an issue around the world, as are many of the challenges that we face. You know, supply shortages, immigration. You know, I'm past chair of the International Housing Association, and I was just there a few weeks ago talking, you know, Australia, England, the United States, everybody's facing similar issues.
You. And then I've heard a lot. So I've met with all the developers in my riding, and I've also met with all the nonprofits that are trying to build deeply affordable homes. So I come from knowledge, at least from the people in my community. For those developers that are looking to create projects, they were having trouble with inflation in terms of penciling it out. And I think, Mayor Morgan, you had talked about that. But we have introduced the removal of the GST on the construction of new apartment buildings. And I have heard from a number of developers that this has actually helped them to sort of get from red into the black. Would you agree that that is what you're hearing? And maybe I'll ask Mayor Morgan to respond, and maybe Mr. Lee as well, just very quickly.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. The penciling it out was Mark's saying. I'd love to take credit for other people's comments, but I can't do that. I would say. I think any measure is helpful, right? And it depends on where they are in the margins. Like if that's the piece that pushes them over.
But have you heard some
yes.
developers say that they've been able to sort of now? Okay.
Yes.
And have you also heard that, Mr. Lee? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, and I don't want anybody to believe that this is the magic bullet. We know that there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of issues. And one of the key things that I find very frustrating when we're having this discussion here is there's a lot of measures that are needed at the provincial, at the municipal. So often when you're talking about things, people don't know, oh, when you're talking about rent control, that's actually province. When you're talking about zoning, that's municipal. And often when you're talking about the Ontario Tribunal, that is Ontario. So it's difficult. And I just would say in your responses, it would be very helpful if you can speak to that as well. It helps for us to understand the complexity, and also when we're making recommendations, how we actually sort of craft those together. One of the things our Minister of Housing and Infrastructure is focused on is how do we protect the existing affordable stock? It's a real issue for us. And maybe I'll start with you, Mayor Morgan, if you could maybe spend 30 seconds or 45 seconds telling us what might be some of your recommendations to do that.
Sure, to protect the existing affordable stock. Well, the challenge we have with the affordable stock, particularly in Ontario, where we were able to create a number of units under bonusing with provincial rules, is that much of the below market rate housing will expire at some point in time, right? So it may be 40 years, 30 years, 50 years. It depends on what it is. And so we need to have the ability to create more. And even with that market rate, one of the vulnerable pieces we found is you can use the certain tools that we used to have to create some level of affordability, but there is a depth between rent geared towards income housing and slightly below market rate housing where there has to be other partners involved who are supported. In London, the municipality is directly involved in builds now. One of them is in partnership with the federal and provincial governments on Sylvan Street, because we know that we can't find a spot to produce those rents that are between that missing middle gap. And unfortunately, in a rising interest rate environment and where people's affordability and their mortgages are coming due, there may be more people kind of moving into that space. And so the supporting and creation of that kind of missing middle, deeply affordable piece is important, because I guess you want to ask how to protect it, but I think there's a gap there anyways, so it's actually a point of creation. And I think we've been very successful in using the Rapid Housing Initiative money to try to create those. Now, I mean, we'd always be happy to take more money, and a fourth and a fifth round would be great, but that has helped municipalities partner. But that is something, like was said, that the market isn't going to produce on its own, and so I don't think it's just protecting the ones that are expiring, it's actually creating that piece in the gap.
We've heard, and I'm going to go to one final question in a minute, but we've heard that when in Ontario, when someone moves out of their apartment and then it can be rented out again, the average price increase is actually 29%. So would you agree that there's actually a provincial role in terms of actually maybe putting some regulations around not allowing that amount of rent to increase?
So yes, there is a provincial role. There's a role for all levels of government, and that is an issue, right? Whether it's rent evictions or the difference between existing people in housing and the new builds and the difference in rental rates, it's a huge issue, and the province absolutely has a role to play on the rental rate side of things.
Okay, and then. Maybe my final question is to Mr. Richardson. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to your first time. One of the things I know that's been talked about is there a need for us to change the equation around, I don't know whether it's how we fund it, how we fund deeply, like the equation for nonprofits who are trying to create deeply affordable homes. Do you think that's something that we need to look at?
100%. And I'll just add a number in for you as well on the HST that you mentioned earlier. The HST savings we calculate on an affordable housing unit, 600 square foot unit in Toronto, is about $48,000 a unit. We really, sorry, I'm going to need you to repeat your question.
Do you believe that we need to change the equation for nonprofits who are trying to create deeply affordable houses?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. They need speed and they need certainty. The monies change a lot. The co-investment fund was $150,000 a door, then it was $25,000 a door, then it was $75,000 a door, and that's all changed. So they don't know what they're entitled to when they're trying to do these calculations. If you want deeply affordable, you want units that are renting for under $800 a month in the city of Toronto, you need to be, offering them long-term, stable subsidies in order to be able to keep those deeply affordable prices.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Zerowitz. And now over to MP Saint-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all our witnesses. We have quite an extraordinary panel today. Thank you so much. And my question is going to be for Ms. Bolduc before she leaves. And if you do have to leave, I can continue with your colleague, Ms. Drolet. But first, would you like to perhaps finish your remarks? Because, we have a chair who's watching the clock, and so you didn't have time to finish. Well, quite briefly, what I was saying, that decisions have to be made as close as they can to the ground. Municipalities have to be involved. There has to be local management of any housing projects, because this will ensure a better outcome. I would also recall that there are problems in cities and rural areas, but those rural challenges are very different from those that one encounters in cities. And perhaps the solutions can be implemented, but it's very difficult to find the means to do that. Thank you. So when there are these programs that are rolled out, Toronto isn't the same as these rural regions. And so what you're saying is that they have to be better adapted to those contexts. Could you perhaps expand on that? Well, we have to be able to be nimble, and the programs have to be nimble, because we're talking about land development, and therefore the kinds of units have to be deployed that people need and that are best suited to the population's needs. And in rural areas, you don't necessarily need these multi-family units. You often need the single-family units. But who is best placed and positioned to identify those needs? Well, it's those local levels. Now, I was listening to all the problems in terms of red tape in the cities, and we do acknowledge that those are real problems. It also happens in Quebec. However, what I would say is that in rural communities, when you need to get a permit and when you want to be able to build, it is much simpler and it is faster. We're talking about land development and housing, and in that context, it's very important to be nimble, as I was saying, and that also can happen in the way you serve these areas. There are organizations in these villages and towns in Quebec, and in the rest of Canada. So there are these nuclei in the towns and areas, but unfortunately, the services that they need are not provided. And what that means is that affordable housing actually cannot be delivered. So what we need to think about is this: how can we best use the spaces that we have? Municipalities and RCMs, which include several municipalities in Quebec, often have similar conditions that they're dealing with, and therefore they are best placed to decide on the kinds of development they want, how they're going to support that development, and how they're going to plan that development. So there has to be good coordination and good planning in order to be able to act in these areas. So we want decisions to be made at the best level with a global vision. And I would conclude in saying that that vision has to be a long-term and a mid-term vision, because oftentimes planning is done over a short period of time. But we have to be able to foresee what is going to happen. And so when there's only short-term planning, it's very hard for this planning to unfold. So we have to be able to meet social needs, and we have to meet the needs of all those levels of housing in these areas. Thank you very much. That's a lot of information, and it's very interesting. So if I understood you correctly, we have to be able to foresee how the situation is going to evolve. So we have to have a mid and a long-term vision, but there is a current crisis, and there is an urgent need for these short-term housing units. One thing that I was struck by in your remarks was this, and that is that we have to make sure that these villages have their word as well. And when you're talking about funds being dispersed, whether it be by Ottawa or Quebec, it has to be adapted to all these areas, because there could be more development in these villages, as you said. Could you expand on that? Thank you. Well, what I would say is this: if you want to be able to be nimble and efficient, you have to have your feet on the ground there in the region. So you really have to be there, truly. And so Parliament is very far from the ground. It's very far from the daily lives of individuals and from the reality, the daily reality of the municipalities. And the same can even apply to Quebec City or to Toronto or Victoria. The provincial governments are also far removed from the daily lives of these municipalities and how these municipalities work when it comes to deploying these projects. And so municipalities really are those who are closest to the needs of their population, and they can respond to the needs of their citizens. There, in fact, municipal governments are actually best positioned and placed to meet the needs in terms of housing. And so what I would say, as I said before, is that there has to be coordination. There has to be adequate coordination depending on the needs of those areas, whether it be a community, whether it be a neighborhood, whether it be an RCM. But you have to be as close as you can be to the ground in order to coordinate what's happening and to be able to make that connection between the promoters and those who need the housing. And these municipalities also have to be supported. In rural areas, and this is probably true of other areas in Canada, the red tape isn't as heavy as it might be in cities. And I believe that the people in the construction industry have spoken about this. Rural regions don't necessarily face as much red tape, but it is difficult to attract promoters and to attract that funding. Thank you very much. That was very clear. Thank you, Ms. Bolduc, and thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
To MP Blakey, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. Dr. McKinnon, in your opening statements, you talked about the challenge Canada faces in terms of losing far more social and affordable housing than we're building. I think Stephen Pomeroy has estimated it at a ratio of 1 to 15. So we're losing 15 social affordable units for every 1 unit that we're building. I'm wondering, there was a decision taken under the Harper Conservatives that was largely continued by the new government to end operating agreements as mortgages for affordable and social homes that were built decades ago. As those mortgages expired and the operating agreements expired, not to renew those agreements. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to how that helped precipitate the loss of a lot of social and affordable housing over the last 10 or 15 years.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so that is a big challenge, and that is in part why we're losing some of the low cost supply. Here in Winnipeg, most recently, we had a large nonprofit seniors complex that was sold by a nonprofit, and there are to a for-profit, and their argument was that they couldn't maintain it anymore because their operating agreement had expired. And this is the case for many nonprofits. So when we talk about how do we maintain existing supply, we need to renew these operating agreements. Otherwise, it's not possible for nonprofit organizations to sustain them at low rents and to do the maintenance that's required. And so that's what that is happening. They're selling off some of that supply, or else they're increasing the rents to market rates. And so then the other issue that's happening, of course, is that as there's a lack of supply and a lack of rent regulations, and yes, this is not a federal issue, but it is really something that is a significant challenge. And when we talk about all levels of government needing to be part of the solution, if we don't have strong rent regulations, we're losing a significant amount of supply through rent evictions, and as units are not being maintained, but yet the rental rates are increasing. So we're losing supply in the private sector. We're losing rent units in the nonprofit sector, and then of course there's virtually no new units being built. So it's a significant problem. But yes, operating agreements need to again be part of the solution.
And so in respect to building new social housing, I know that, having operating funding in place for social housing is important. We've also heard others say that, by having low interest loans in the financing that are below kind of market loan levels might create financial space to offer either affordable rents or social rents. What do you think about the kind of mix of those solutions, either trying to provide some of that subsidy upfront on the capital side in order to reduce the operating costs of the project over time versus having an operating agreement in place that would continue to roll out funds over time? Is one better or worse? Does it depend on the project? Are there some examples of success recently under the National Housing Strategy that you could point to in the Winnipeg context that would light the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but the reality is we need all of those things. So we're not suggesting that, we don't need to increase rental housing more generally, but the reality really is it's that deeply affordable housing that really needs significant subsidy. It needs, if you want nonprofits to be building it, they need significant capital grants, but they need ongoing subsidies. When you're renting units less than market value and deeply less than market value, as we're suggesting is needed if we're looking at rent geared to income to the lowest income renters, then you're going to need ongoing subsidies, and that means operating agreements. Part of the challenge is the loss of even the public housing supply across the country is that we're not, and this again is more of a provincial issue, is that we're not maintaining the budgets to do the maintenance. So again, you've got units falling in disrepair, vacant because they're in such poor repair. So there's this multiple things that need to be done, but we maintain that if we don't focus on the lowest income renters, the group of people that are in most dire need, we're not going to solve this problem if we just keep developing market level and above, or even just slightly below.
one of the things we've heard is that, whatever else happens, it's going to cost a lot of money in order to be able to build an adequate amount of social and affordable housing. And there's a lot of emphasis on the cost. Are you aware of any efforts to quantify the cost of not having this housing? Because we also hear from business owners who say, they can't attract talent to come work for them because there's no place to house the workforce. Are you aware of efforts to quantify the cost of not building housing, so we're not just talking about how much it costs to get that housing there? I'll go first to Dr. McKinnon, and then I see that that another witness has put her hand up, Madame Bolduc, puis je pense qu'elle doit partir.
And I think she has to leave soon. So, do you? I will have to leave. Thank you so much for the invitation, and Ms. Drolet will remain in order to answer your questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Yep.
so Dr. McKinnon, I don't know, are you aware of some efforts to quantify the cost of inaction?
Well, I mean, again, we only need to look around us to see the cost of inaction as we look across the country at the number of people living without homes. We know that the impact on the health outcomes. We know the impact on education outcomes. We know that lack of housing or inadequate housing has an impact on people's participation in the labor market. We know that criminal activities as a result of poverty and lack of housing. So on and on and on. We can talk about the impact. And so, yes, I mean, it is expensive, but it's only becoming more expensive as we ignore the reality that we have to, it's going to cost us money to address housing for low-income people, and there's just really no way around that.
Thank you very much.
Members, witnesses, we're moving into our second round, just that the times are a little different in this round. We are starting with MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to our witnesses today. I don't excuse my brevity or imply my brevity is a rudeness. I want to get as much in as possible. Mr. Lee, the National Research Council has come out with the new National Building Code, net zero by 2030. How much is that going to add to the cost of a new house? Has your organization done any work on how much that will add to construction costs?
Yeah, it's probably over $50,000
per unit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Who pays development charges?
Homeowners, home buyers.
But they're first paid by builders. They float the charges until the homeowner.
Exactly. They finance them until it's in the cost of the house. Yeah.
So they're financed by the home builder. Then the homeowner has to pay for them.
Yes.
So when a city increases development charges by 49% from $94,000 per unit for a semi-detached home to $140,000 per unit, the homeowner pays, as does someone has to float that charge until the homeowner pays, correct?
Yep. So you're paying interest on that charge until you then pass it on to the homeowner. Yes.
Thank you very much. Last question for you. Have StatsCan asked you for any data on who are the purchases of new builds? Are they all used for your primary residence? Are they foreigner? Are they foreign investors? Have you been asked for any of that data from StatsCan?
We don't have that data,
okay.
And unfortunately, almost nobody in Canada has that data, which is a problem. There's a flying blind element to not having that data.
Thank you very much. I'd like to explore that further at a future meeting. Mr. Morgan, one of the things we can do as a committee or as parliamentarians, we can get information. I don't know the answer to this question. This is genuine. Do you have good information? As an example, how many units in London today are now short-term rental, say Airbnb? I don't like using names of corporations, but do you know how many units today are Airbnbs in London?
So I don't know that off the top of my head, but we have previously done an analysis of that because we changed the rules around Airbnb to say you had to live in the unit to be able to rent it out. So you couldn't be, it had to be owner occupied or owner owned. So you couldn't have 3 or 4 of them. So, but that was a legislative change we made.
Thank you very much. Would you appreciate data from these platforms that show, how many units are available 9 months a year, 30 days a year, 12 months a year? Is that something that you'd be interested as a mayor?
Yes, I'm always interested in data because data-driven decision-making is always a good way to go.
Perfect. I'd like to help you with that at some point. Mr. Richardson, how do we find out what lands or surplus lands are available from the federal government? It seems hard. It's in a bunch of different places. Who knows where they live? Do you think we have a good idea where the surplus lands are?
Sadly, no. HART UBC, the program we're working with, they have tried to create a tool that has surplus lands from all levels of government in a single view. The federal government isn't very good at it because it's distributed amongst different organizations. So like here in Ottawa, some of it might be with Canada Lands, some of it might be with National Capital Commission, with the RCMP. We would, if any question you want to ask about data from our point of view, we want more of it, and we want more of it to be transparent. We're nerds, and let us loose on the data, but in order to do that, you have to make the data open and accessible.
So would you recommend that this committee ask for a list of all federal surplus land so we have it in one place?
100%, and I would say the parameters of what needs to be on that list is something our organization would be very helpful to give you feedback on, because a list is no good without some of the what does this parcel contain information.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That was rapid fire. I do have enough for a question, but I'll just, because I got all my questions in, I'll just point out we need more data. We need more witnesses here that are going to explain why we don't have the data, including short-term rental operators. We need to know where the surplus lands are. And somebody, for crying out loud, has to get the National Research Council in here and NRCan to explain why, in the absence of everybody telling them, they've gone ahead and going to saddle new home purchasers with $50,000 of new costs when they change the building code. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. And as everybody has noticed, we have quite a force here from London. And we have a special guest here, I guess, MP from London, Peter Fragoskatos. I know MP Matheson's also here from London, and we're going to have a lot of questions, I guess, about London. So MP Fragoskatos, the floor is yours.
You should be so lucky that London is so well represented here today, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I'm going to begin with Mayor Morgan. Mayor, thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing. $74 million for the Housing Accelerator Fund recently announced. London is the first city in the country to receive it. How will that funding be used specifically?
Well, at a base level, we were going to build 9,432 homes over the next 3 years. Now we're going to build 11,619. And by build, I don't mean the municipality will build it, but we're going to enable the creation of more stock. Now, I mean, I can answer a question on, there's a number of ways that we're going to do that outlined in our application, but at the end of the day, we're going to do 23% more than we otherwise would have.
Okay, so 2,000 more homes. What are the keys? How are you going to get there? And I know you did touch on this in your presentation, but it's good for the committee, I think, to know how it all works, the mechanics of this particular program, the back and forth, the give and take between the federal government that's offering funding and municipalities and changes they're prepared to make to receive that funding.
Sure. So I'll mention a couple of things, and then I'll just watch for the old time wrap up. First, there was actually, through the discussion of the application, an engagement with Minister Fraser about the number of as-of-right units that we would permit in the city, and a desire to increase that, which I took to council. Council approved, and now we've moved forward with implementing. An important piece linked to that, though, that we're also looking into to ensure that is effective legislation is the bedroom cap as well across the city, which we'll review and report back on the new year, because you can have more as-of-right units, but if you have bedroom caps in part of your city, then you're essentially restricting it anyways. So that engagement was helpful in understanding the federal government's desire on those pieces, and something that the city was willing to move forward with. With the actual Housing Accelerator Fund money, which is flexible, and so although these are the envelopes under which we plan to spend it, there is some flexibility to really go after the processes that will create the most units. We're going to do a number of things. We're going to implement new incentives for conversions of non-residential to residential units in the downtown core. We're going to look into new community improvement programs, so incentive programs in our transit areas where we may, either for affordable or even creating higher densification, do a waiver of some kind of development charge fees. We haven't developed that program yet, but we're looking into using some of the Housing Accelerator Fund to develop new incentive programs that can drive both affordability and unit creation. We're going to participate in direct builds like we have in the past with the federal government on actually getting into that missing middle that I mentioned from the earlier question about the deeply affordable units. We're going to actually invest in housing enabling infrastructure. So although we have the development charges fund, the way that is planned over time isn't always conducive to the time frame for unlocking land. And so with some of that money, we will potentially create either investments in wastewater improvements or water infrastructure that either wouldn't be covered in the DC fund or is being accelerated in the time frame to unlock areas of high density residential intensification in parts of our city sooner, earlier, and to a greater degree. We're going to use some of that too to invest in supportive housing because we recognize that even the most marginalized and vulnerable in our city deserve a place to live as well. And so a piece of this is about partnering to build more supportive housing with wraparound service supports within our city.
And moving towards electronic permitting, right, as part of this.
Yes. Oh, there's a piece I missed, and thank you for asking. There's a whole series of process improvements because, like I said, shared accountability, federal, provincial, municipal government, development community, not-for-profit sector all have a role to play. One of the things we need to actively work on is speeding up processes, cutting red tape, and getting things done at the municipal level. We are using some of the Housing Accelerator funds to improve those processes in consultation with those who use the processes, which is why we set up a housing supply committee of both the city, the development community, and the not-for-profit community to dig into how to effectively use that money.
Thank you, Mayor. With the remaining time, Mr. Chair, I did want to go to Sue Wastel. Sue, great to see you again. Thank you, of course, for the work that you're doing locally, provincially, and nationally. You've heard now what the mayor has said on electronic permitting. This is something that you and I have discussed in the past. It is very much tied as part of the Accelerator Fund. What do you see, what do you hear in your circles, either provincially or nationally, in terms of permitting delays that we see in different municipalities and how that affects construction time?
Thanks, Peter. I think certainly locally, it's something we do already have some form of electronic permitting, but there's certainly opportunity to improve the timelines by perhaps making adjustments to that system or even going with a newer system that's available. And I do certainly know across Ontario, there are many municipalities that do not have that luxury of having electronic permitting. And even, not just big developers or builders, homeowners will find a great benefit in able to do this work and be effective in getting their permits out quicker, which will certainly save money in the long run when it comes to housing.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Vargas-Gatos. That's well, we're over time, actually. So we're going to MP Saint-Marie, please, now.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be for Ms. Drolet. Good evening, and thank you for appearing before us today. What we've seen is that the latest data from the CMHC shows that there has been a 58% decrease in building in Greater Montreal. Now, do you also see that in the municipalities that you represent? Thank you. Thank you for the question. We have seen that to a certain extent. Perhaps it's less extensive, but there are many factors, as others have mentioned today. We have been affected by the labor shortage, like other areas. So there are many projects where we can't find the developers, we can't find the builders to meet these calls to tender. So that means that those housing builds don't happen. So there are many factors involved. And obviously interest rates have an effect on the slowdown, but there's also an increase in construction costs. And what we're also hearing from municipalities is that they are trying to be more involved. Just to follow up on what Ms. Bolduc was saying, following the pandemic, we saw many people returning into the regions, including young people. And there are businesses that have been slowed down in their expansion projects because there isn't enough room. There isn't an ability to accommodate all those young people who want to come back. There are young people looking for places to live, but there's nothing left. There's nothing to sell. So we don't even have a 3% vacancy rate. So it's very difficult. And then there are also regulatory issues. I think Quebec differs from Ontario in some cases. We have to deal with the Housing Authority in Quebec as well. Now there's an agreement, so we'll see what the details of that agreement will be. But what we want to see is that there be more decentralization so that more power is given to the municipalities in order to better meet the needs of the local populations at that scale, at that human scale. So that's what we're seeing in the various programs. It's very difficult to be able to use criteria that can't be reshaped or adapted, and then it adds to the time it takes to kick off these projects. Thank you very much, Ms. Drolet.
It just came to my attention that this room is, because we were supposed to be here only till 5:30. I think things got delayed today. We have it only till 6, so, and that's coming up in 8 minutes. So I'm going to go to MP Blakey for about 2.5 minutes, but then I am going to cut short MP Lawrence and MP Baker, which each will get 2.5 minutes. Is that all right? Everybody okay? Okay. So, I'm sorry, MP Matheson. My apologies. And yeah, of course, MP Matheson from London, of course, yeah, who have taken over our committee here today. Yeah. So MP Matheson, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I have a short period of time, so I'd like to direct my questions to Mayor Morgan. We've talked about it today. There are many Londoners specifically who are facing rent evictions in our city, and I've been certainly trying to draw attention to people in my riding on Webster Street in those apartments who are facing the same. Would the City of London benefit from something New Democrats have called for in terms of the creation of a not-for-profit housing acquisition fund? So co-ops, not-profits, municipal governments could access funding, allowing them to then purchase buildings, units that would normally be sold in that higher market rate to people who are only interested in profit and keep them in that not-for-profit affordable state?
So I think you'd rarely find a mayor or an elected official who would say no to a new fund that would flow more money to cities, particularly to try any innovative solution, particularly for people who are likely to be evicted and maybe move into a space where they can't afford the rent. I think that there's certainly roles for the provincial government to play with what's happening in our city as well, and some of the controls or lack of controls that exist there, but I mean, I'd have to understand exactly what it is better, but I would say all of us should be open to many creative ideas on how to tackle the challenge we have.
One of the things that Mr. Richards spoke to was in terms of that affordability, holding models of affordability for 99 plus years. In terms of this accelerator fund that has been given to London, the creation of that affordability, how long are you expecting that holding of affordability to last?
I can't answer that very specifically yet because the fund allows us to engage in a number of activities. And until we start to actually develop those out with the different partners, some of them may be partnerships with not-for-profit, others may be direct city builds where we might have a little more control. I know the fund flows in phases, so there'll be an accounting for us to create the units. So what I'll say is I can't answer that yet. It is our desire to create both depth of affordability as well as length of affordability as much as possible. Again, there are trade-offs with the amount of money you have to being able to go for which one. And because of the different types of housing that we'll be supporting under the fund, it might apply differently to, say, supportive housing with deeply affordable housing with some of the other housing that we're trying to create. I will say we are focused on trying to create affordability with the money.
So how...
Matheson, I know, and I apologize. So over to MP Morantz for about 2 minutes or so. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Has Minister of Finance accepted our gracious invitation to appear here?
The PS is not here. I know the PS was looking into that, and
okay.
But MP Morantz.
Thank you. Just I wanted to touch on some of the different tax treatments that might be available to incentivize the private sector in home construction. I remember back in the 1970s and 80s, there was the multi-unit residential building program that allowed people investing in real estate to take the capital cost allowance and soft costs against personal and professional income. I noticed in your submission to the Finance Committee, you talked about one thing that could be done, for example, is the deferral of the capital gains tax and recaptured capital cost allowance on the sale of rental housing if reinvested in rental housing. There's other things that could be done too, but I wonder if you could comment on the tremendous potential of tax incentivization to help be a solution to this problem.
Yeah, I think that's really important, in terms of new construction, the GST was our big ask, but in terms of incenting moving the sale of buildings, which actually, by the way, one of our recommendations was tax credits to sell the building to the nonprofit sector to keep them affordable and move them into the nonprofit sector if you were taking that money and reinvesting in new supply. So between, capital tax deferrals to tax credits that would enable people to move supply into the nonprofit sector, it can have it's right now about purpose-built rental. It's been so hard to pencil out projects for decades. So every tax measure that can make it competitive and enable the market to work is beneficial.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Richardson wanted to comment on this, Mr. Chair, if I still have time.
Quick question, yeah.
Mr. Richardson?
We've been working with the Urban Land Institute's Toronto Affordable Housing Leadership Council, and that's one of the reports we're going to submit next month. One of the things that has been identified there is the accelerated depreciation. So reducing the early year tax burden on rental housing by reducing taxable income in current years in exchange for increased taxable income in future years. I'm not a tax lawyer, so I can only pass on what's going to be that recommendation, but in the same way the HST helped, in the same way this accelerated depreciation might help, we need every tool. We need the Swiss Army knife approach to solve the housing crisis.
Thank you.
MP Morantz. And now for the final 2 minutes, MP Baker.
Thanks, Chair. I'll direct my questions to Mark Richardson from Housing Now. First of all, could you speak to, recently the Government of Canada announced that we were removing the GST on the construction of new rental housing. Can you talk about what the impact of that is?
So as I was speaking to earlier, removing the GST, our calculation for a City of Toronto project, about 200 units, about 600 square feet per unit, it works out to about, if the province joins in with you, about $48,000 per unit is saved through that tax treatment. But there are some things there are projects underway right now that aren't going to qualify for that tax treatment because it's only for new projects, not projects that are already sort of in the pre-build phase. So rolling back that date, we know there are big projects in Toronto right now that don't pencil, that will either be canceled or will flip to condo versus being purpose-built rental. So sliding the date back as much as possible will be appreciated.
Okay. And has the province joined in on that?
They said they were going to, but I don't think they've actually passed the regulations yet. They've been busy with other things at the housing ministry in the province of Ontario.
Understood. Hopefully they do. Could you speak about what the impact of that, dates aside for a moment, the impact of the government's decision to remove the GST on the construction of new rental housing? What is the impact ultimately of those cost savings?
It makes projects more viable. The challenge is that $48,000 a door that we're now saving, when I talked about the acceleration, if we'd had it in 2016 when the costs were lower, when interest rates were lower, it would have been more valuable. Introducing it now, saving that $48,000, really takes a 2023 project back to 2019 numbers on its viability. So it's one of the tools in the Swiss Army knife, but all you're doing is sort of counteracting the increase in interest rates and increases in construction costs. There needs to be now, we've set ourselves back a little bit. How do we find other tools to improve and incentivize?
I often wonder what we could accomplish if we could go back in time and. Yeah.
We could accomplish a lot, but thank you, MP Baker. We'll have to think about that. We want to thank our housing experts, our witnesses that have come before our committee for this study on housing. Your many answers to the many questions will help inform the study. We thank you so much on behalf of the committee members, the clerk, the analysts, the interpreters, and everybody else here. Thank you very much. And that will adjourn our meeting, members. Thank you.